Hi, ladies and gentlemen. So today we're going to be looking at Atkinson and Shiffrin's model of memory and the brain regions associated with memory. So memory can be defined as the processing, storage, and retrieval of information gathered through learning. There are different models to explain human memory. However, more often than not, they use the Atkinson and Shiffrin model of memory in VCE. So this is pretty much how the Atkinson and Shiffrin model is broken down, and there is a more detailed one later on in the video. So if you happen to look at here, long-term memory tends to be implicit and procedural. So if you happen to look here, right, we have long-term memory is implicit and procedural, and then it also is long-term is explicit, episodic, and semantic. So lip and lees. That's how I remember it. Do whatever works for you. All right, so if you look at this particular one, you have sensory memory to begin with, then short-term, then long-term. Long-term does get broken down. So the Atkinson and Shiffrin model of memory, please remember to also memorize the title. It has three separate stores: sensory, short-term, and long-term memory. And they all have different functions, different capacities, and durations. So sensory memory is the entry point of memory, where new incoming sensory information is stored for a very brief period of time. So it could be what you see, what you hear, and everything is brought into your memory or your sensory memory if you've paid attention to it. So sensory memory is divided into two different parts, and that's iconic memory and echoic memory. So iconic refers to visual sensory memory, and I tend to remember it as iconic with the, I. So it's visual, which is stored for between 0.2 and 0.4 seconds. Echoic memory deals with auditory sensory memory. So echoic, echo. And it's stored for 3 to 4 seconds, and that allows us to make sense of speech. You need to know the duration and capacity of all the features of Atkinson and Shiffrin's. We are not consciously aware of most of the sensory information in sensory memory. It's just there long enough for us to select what is important and what we need to pay attention to. So you might feel that there's something crawling on your leg and go, wait, I should probably pay attention to that because, well, it could bite you. Anything that you do pay attention to goes to short-term memory. Anything that you don't gets lost. So short-term memory is a memory system where information is stored for a short period of time. Short-term memory is where all conscious reasoning, thinking, and planning takes place. This is where you start to work out what is important, what do I need to pay attention to, and what do I need to transfer to long-term memory. So information stored or transferred to short-term memory from sensory memory, but can also be retrieved from long-term memory. And we have a look at that in a couple of minutes. The duration is between 12 and 18 seconds, though it can be up to 30. And they usually have, VCARD tends to look at this section here, right? 12 to 18 seconds. But it can be up to 30 in some people. Short-term memory also has a very limited capacity. It can store 7 plus or minus 2 items, which is what VCARD prefers you to write it as. And I'm going to pretend that I can actually draw this. So 7, I do apologize, plus or minus, and then 2. Right? They actually prefer you to write it that way, but you don't lose marks if you write it as 5 to 9 items. Right? Information is lost from short-term memory due to decay, so it's not being used, or displacement. So it gets pushed out due to too many items. So make sure you know the capacity and duration of every single element of Atkinson and Shiffrin's. The capacity of short-term memory can be increased through the process known as chunking. This question comes up a lot in VCAR exams when they're talking about the capacity being increased. Always chunking. So this is where you chunk different numbers together. So think about your phone number, and I'm not going to say a phone number, I'll have people call me, right? But you tend to chunk it into 4, 3, 3 instead of just having the 10 digits. You tend to chunk them into 3 digits. Short-term memory is also known as working memory due to the fact that you have to consciously work to keep it in short-term memory. Long-term memory stores potentially unlimited, so that's the capacity, amount of information for a very long time, perhaps forever. They prefer potentially unlimited capacity with potentially unlimited duration. The reason why you happen to mention potentially is that they're trying to take into consideration that things could happen. There are different types of long-term memory which are associated with different types of memory. So with explicit memory, it involves memory that occurs when information can be consciously retrieved. So I explicitly know this. This is what's known as declarative memory. So I declare that I know this. Episodic memory is the memory events that you personally experience. So I like to call them episodes of your life. Semantic memory is the knowledge of facts and knowledge about the world. And this is like general knowledge, like if you're at a trivia quiz, semantic memory would be what you'd be using. It also deals with implicit memory. So implicit memory involves memory that doesn't require conscious retrieval. Right? Individuals are not aware that they're remembering something. You just know it, right? You don't need to explain it. You can just do it. And usually this relates to procedural memory. And this is how you do something. This is your how-to memories. How to ride a bike, how to brush your teeth, how to brush your hair, how to walk, talk, all that sort of stuff. These are procedural memories. You never lose, 99% of the time, you never lose procedural memories, even if you have amnesia. Right? You do not forget how to do things. You just may forget that you know how to do them. And then classical conditioning memory is also part of implicit memory. So this would be if you've learned something through reflexes, the repeat association, this would be due to implicit memories. Alrighty, so if we happen to have a look at this, I'm going to give you a moment, pause the video and copy this out because it gives a pretty succinct idea of what the Atkinson and Shiffrin model is actually all about. Strongly recommend. Alright, so the different parts of the brain associated with memory and learning technically. So long-term memories are not stored in any one brain location, but they're usually across different spots of the brain. So the cerebral cortex is the outside layer of the brain. It's connected to everything. Long-term, explicit, semantic and episodic, so facts and events in your life, are distributed throughout the cerebral cortex. Different parts are generally stored in the area of the cortex where the relevant information was first processed. So if you're looking at an AFL football match you attended, you might have the roar of the crowd, so auditory information stored in the auditory cortex of the temporal lobe, and the sight of the goal being kicked in the visual part of the occipital lobe, and the names of the teams might be stored in the frontal lobe, right? Wherever it's processed first is usually where it's stored. So it might not be a memory of a whole event. It might be bits and pieces of the event that get pieced together when you remember it later. So long-term explicit memories are distributed throughout the brain. All right, so the hippocampus is located in the temporal lobe. And remember, hippocampus is vital in the consolidation of memories. So it's part of the brain responsible for turning short-term memories into long-term memories. VCAR tend to ask a lot of questions about the hippocampus, so you may want to review this in great detail. It's vital in the consolidation of new explicit, so facts and episodes in your life, so that they are stable and long-lasting. However, it is not directly involved in the formation of implicit memories, so procedural and classical conditioned. So procedural, once again, are how-to memories. Classical conditioned memories are ones that you've learned through the repeated association. The hippocampus is also responsible for spatial memory. So that's the physical location of objects, how to get places. So you know how to get to school, you go past the McDonald's, you turn right at the funny looking letterbox, whatever. This is all due to the hippocampus. I need to make it very clear, nothing is stored in the hippocampus. It's just a processing center. So nothing is stored in the hippocampus. See? Hippocampus doesn't actually store long-term memories. After they have been consolidated, they are transferred to the cerebral cortex where they are stored. So once again, this might be a good little picture for you to put into your notes. So you may want to pause it here and actually put it in. So just so we're clear, the cerebellum stores procedural memories, and hippocampus is to do with declarative memories. The amygdala adds emotional content to declarative memories. So let's say, for example, you had a terrible birthday. Your hippocampus will remember, the facts and events associated with your birthday, right? And your amygdala might remember, why you cried and the emotional feelings associated with that birthday. And then the cerebral cortex is involved in the formation and storage of memories. Alrighty, so the amygdala plays a crucial role in the processing of the emotional responses. The amygdala is responsible in the formation of emotional memories. People or animals without the amygdala or with a damaged amygdala are generally unable to acquire a fear response. And they saw this a lot in rats. In 2020, there were a plague of rats that entered New York subway, and they had captured quite a few of them. And these rats actually did not have a fully formed amygdala, and they were vicious. They didn't fear people whatsoever, and they were attacking people. So, yeah, 2020, yay. So people are more likely to remember events that produce a strong emotional reaction. Obviously, that one did for me. During a high emotional arousal, noradrenaline is released at the amygdala. So if you're having a terrible party, right, there is a good chance that you're going to be very emotional and you're going to release noradrenaline because you're just so upset. And when they do release noradrenaline, it stimulates the amygdala to signal the hippocampus to ensure that a stronger encoding is needed. Although the amygdala is important in the formation of emotional memories, like the hippocampus, it doesn't store them. The cerebellum is involved in the encoding and temporary storage of implicit procedural memories. So they're the how-to memories again. Is vital for learning and the execution of motor skills. So learning how to write, type, whatever, this is where you'd learn it first. The cerebellum stores simple reflex actions, such as associating a sound with a puff of air and blinking in anticipation of the puff, but doesn't store more complex procedural memories. So the dog salivating would be the cerebellum. Little Albert's fear response would be the cerebellum. So it's all the reflex. So the different types of retrieving memory. So retrieval of information from memory can be successful or unsuccessful. Whether or not information is retrieved from memory and the amount of information that is retrieved depends on the type of retrieval method that is used. Recall involves reproducing information that is already stored in memory. The information is brought into conscious awareness, which shows something previously learned has been retained. There are three different types of recall. So free recall involves reproducing as much information as possible without any specific cue and in no particular order. So all I say, describe classical conditioning. That's it. And you'll be free recalling without any cues whatsoever. Serial recall would involve recalling something in the order in which it was originally learnt or in the order in which it happened. So the Prime Ministers of Australia, or the route that you go to school, right? So serial recall is what needs to be done in a serial order. Cued recall is using cues to assist with the retrieval of information. And I might do that and go, all right, so what was a part of the neuron starting with an A. And so that would be a cued recall because you're getting some sort of hint. Obviously, out of the three of them, cued recall is one of the easier ones. However, free recall is pretty much whatever you have, put it down. And you'll notice that happens in the exam. So another type is recognition. And this is your identifying the correct information from a list of alternatives that include incorrect information. So the multiple choice questions on the exam or a SAC, this is recognition. You don't need to recall all of the information that you know about it. You just need to recognize what's right and what's wrong. So essentially, it is a cue. Recognition is a more sensitive measure of retention than recall. So you're more likely to do better in multiple choice than you are in short answer. We're more likely to retrieve more of the information using recognition than recall. This is why multiple choice questions are easier. Relearning is the last one. And relearning involves learning information again that was previously learned. So let's say, for example, this particular video, we've already gone through all this stuff in class. But if you're watching this again, then this means that you're relearning the information. And if you're relearning it, it means that some aspects, I'm really hoping, are actually already in your memory. So all this is doing is jogging your memory. So information that is learned the second time is going to be quicker. And this is because you've already learned most of it. Generally, relearning something takes less effort and less time than the first time it was learnt. Relearning is also known as the method of savings, as it can be used to measure how much information was saved from the original learning. It is considered to be the most sensitive measure of retention. And you'll notice as we go through this slide that I've actually gone through this one a couple of times. The most sensitive measure of retention, this means that you're more likely to retain the information or recall the information using relearning over recognition and recall. It actually goes in the opposite way that I've mentioned it. So relearning is the best method of retrieval. Recognition is the second best method of retrieval, and recall is the third best method of retrieval. So this is the method of savings down the bottom here. All right, so the method of savings is the time that it was taken for original learning. So let's say it took you 100 minutes, because it's nice and easy, right? Minus the time that it took you the next time, it took you only 50 minutes. And then divided by the time for the original, and then times by 100. In other words, it's going to take you 50% less time than what it did the first time you learnt it. And if you go through it again for a third time, then it'll take even less time. And the more times that you go over it, the less time it's going to take. All right, so this is just another way of just sort of breaking it down. You may want to copy and paste this into the notes. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.